Morning, Matt. Thanks for coming to see us all at U-Test. Would you kindly tell us your story?
It all started back in September 2021. I'd been into bodybuilding for years, and for the first time in my life I decided to give a bodybuilding show a go. But things went a bit south. I ended up with pneumonia in hospital. In that time I had some bloods done, but nothing came back. When I got home, my coach basically told me to relax, we could do another show, so they left it at that, and I just ate and enjoyed food again, because obviously with the diet it's quite restrictive. But my bowels played up uncontrollably to the point where I was going to the toilet a lot. I was passing quite a lot of blood, so Holly, my partner, was like, you need to go to the doctors. So I made an appointment. This was the first time going to the doctors for this issue, because I'd never had anything like this before. But I went in unfazed, met this doctor who explained that he was going to have to examine me, which isn't the most pleasant of things. So he puts on his glove and examines me, sits me back up on the bed and explains that you can't really feel anything. I probably just got a little tear just inside my bottom, and basically sent me on my way. Didn't think anything of it. As a typical man, I was fit, I was working, and off I went. Fast forward to 2022, I was back training for another show, and everything was going fine. And then when we started putting the carbs in just before the show, my bowels started playing up again. Same as what they did in 21, but this time more erratic, to the point where I was running to the toilet. It was uncontrollable and very unpleasant. And then they calmed down. I did the show, and a couple of weeks later my daughter was born. So it's a pretty special month in May. Willow was born, and obviously a newborn baby. I was up doing night feeds. But I started going to the toilet in the night. You don't normally go to the toilet in the night. It's normally a daytime thing. Your body's programmed to go morning, afternoon, evening. And all of a sudden now I'm doing a night feed and then sitting on the toilet. Didn't really think anything of it, because it became normal. I'd do a feed, I'd go to the loo, I'd go back to bed. We've planned a family holiday to Salou. We came back from there. It was an all-inclusive holiday. My missus was like, you're going to lose, you probably put on plenty of weight because you're just no dieting, just eating, relaxing. I lost a whole stone, which was a bit of a shock, because being very active to not doing a lot and just eating freely, I know we put on quite a bit of weight. But again, my bowels were still quite irregular. About a week later I started getting pain here in the left hand side of my stomach, and a griping pain that would cripple me. So like I'm chatting now, but it would really stop me talking. And Holly was like, you need to go to the doctors. So I booked another appointment. Oh, come in, emergency appointment, no problem, because obviously again I was passing blood and I was having pain. Sat in the doctor's surgery for 2.5 hours, watching people come and go. Nobody saw me, and I was literally about to leave, and they called my name, and I went in. Female doctor this time, really nice, really friendly, but again, unfortunately she had to examine me, which nobody likes being examined, but it was something I had to do. So she examined me. Again, couldn't really find anything. Laid me on the bed and poked around my stomach, and I winced in pain as she pushed me there. And she decided that, I think we should rule out any nasties, were her exact words, and I'll send you into the hospital. So she booked me an appointment on the Monday, and that was that. So Monday morning I went in, met a male doctor who examined me with this 12-inch periscope thing, which he had to insert inside me, which enabled him to see with inside your colon. Did what he needs to do, got dressed, sat me down, said 100%, nothing wrong with him, and sent me on my way. A week later I had a phone call for a CT scan, which shocked me, because he had questioned something he'd seen. Although he said he saw nothing, he obviously saw something. So a CT scan was booked. The CT scan was done. I asked the question if that was it. They told me, if you don't hear anything, give your doctors a call. Okay, no problem. So I'm walking out of Asda, and my phone rings, no caller ID. Strange. It's the colonoscopy department. So I'm a little bit baffled. You booked for a camera scan. Oh, why having a camera scan? Oh, it showed something in your CT scan. So obviously at this point I'm a little bit concerned. Went home and told Holly, look, don't worry, I'm sure it's nothing. So the scan was booked for the following week, I think. they give you a bowel flushing kit, which basically just empties everything out your bowel, so everything's clean, so they can examine you with a camera. So I did all that, went through everything on that weekend, anything from Crohn's to IBS, to anything that it could be other than cancer, because cancer would be on a list of possibilities, but if you go on Google, it's always going to be at the bottom, because at 39 years old, I was fit, and I didn't believe that that's what would happen. So the Monday I went in for the camera scan, and I read all the notes, done all the prep. It's a 20 to 40 minute scan, okay, so they do this and so forth. I lay on the bed with a monitor pretty much here, and the consultant's there as he puts the camera inside me. The camera goes up and right, and within 5 minutes he stops and he says, I'm going to show you something. And he pulls the camera back and he says, this is healthy bowel, and you can see the inside of your bowel, which was weird looking. And then he moves the camera forward, and there's this golf ball size tumour that's pretty much blocking most of my large intestine, which is why I was getting the pain, because obviously as my bowels were digesting the food and it came to this point, it was trapped, which would stretch, cause me a huge amount of pain until I was able to sit on the toilet. So they did a little biopsy, laid me back on the bed, and he said to me, do you want me to explain what we found? Because as a specialist nurse on the way up to see you, I'm not a child. So he said, you've got bowel cancer, and we've got something in your liver as well. So I'm laying there now crying. Obviously nobody wants to hear they've got cancer. To be told that one, it's in my bowels and they think they've got it in my liver as well, just left me dumbfounded. I left the room, and in the bed they wheeled me out, I got changed, and then sat with a specialist nurse who explained, you've got bowel cancer and we're going to take the following steps and move forward. So a meeting was booked, obviously, for the next week. I had to go home and tell Holly, which was probably one of the hardest things I've had to do. Bring my mum and dad, again, all the family, and explain that the test that they were all waiting on the results for to be negative had come back with the worst possible outcome. We didn't know at that point what I was in for, as you don't. You know, I didn't really know anyone that had cancer, and I didn't know anyone who'd gone through anything that would follow. So we went to the first meeting a week later, and the surgeon explained to me that the cancer was in my large intestine and in my liver. They were going to defunction the bowel, install a stoma bag, which meant that nothing would go through my back end anymore. All my waste would go into this bag on my stomach. I was dumbfounded, dead against this. I've prided myself in training, looking after myself, and I'm going to have a bag stuck on my stomach for the rest of my life. It was quite a hard thing to process, or with the same conversation that I've got cancer at the same time. I left there angry and annoyed and lost, if I'm honest. I didn't really know how to feel. And the surgery was booked for the 7th of December. So the 7th of November, the tumour was first seen, and then for the following weeks I had different scans to make sure it was exactly what they said it was, and I was booked to have it removed on the 7th of December. Monday the 5th of December, I was still working, but I was starting to spike temperatures. I was hitting nearly 42 degrees, which was really worrying Holly. I'd never had temperatures that high. They left me absolutely on fire and feeling really ill, but I just thought this is what cancer is. So I tried to carry on, paracetamols, but it wasn't really touching it. Rung the stoma nurses, let's just come in for a CT scan. So I go in for a scan on the Tuesday, the night before the surgery. And as I'm walking out, my consultant walks in, who's doing the operation. He says, have a seat. Let me just check that your bowel isn't perforated, because of the size of the tumour, they were worried that it had become blocked, and basically the bowel was now starting to split, which could lead to like sepsis and huge complications inside me. He comes and takes a seat next to me. He says, we've got a problem. The tumour's grown 30 millimetres into your bladder. So I'm sitting there bewildered now that the tumour that I'd seen 3 weeks before has now grown into another organ. It hadn't spread, it had grown. So it had grown through the wall and into the wall of the bladder, which means the two had bonded together. Obviously your organs are all separate, so there's walls, and these now were two bonded through a tumour. I said, what does that mean? It means we can't do the surgery tomorrow, because this is too complex. So I had to go and tell Holly again now that the cancer that was in one organ and in the liver has now grown into another organ, and now I've got a completely different battle on my hands. Obviously tears, more upset. booked in then for the Wednesday morning. I went in and they defunctioned the bowel to install the stoma bag and left the tumour in me. Their plan was to give me chemotherapy to shrink the tumour back out of the bladder to save the bladder. That was the plan. I met with one consultant who told me you'll lose your bladder, which was a hard thing to hear, let alone digest. I didn't really understand the implications of losing a bladder. You don't really until you go more into depth with it, as I'll explain further on. So the whole of December I spiked temperatures, 39, 40, 41, 41 and a half. Really ill. And then the 6th of January, I believe, I drove to Valindra to have my PICC line put in, which would be my chemotherapy treatment. That was a bit of a shock to the old system, because again, I've never had chemotherapy or knew someone who'd been through chemotherapy. The lady stood there with this long rubber tube, stretching it while she explained that she was gonna put it in through a vein in my bicep that then went down and sat just outside a valve in my heart, which would feed the chemotherapy directly into the heart. I'm not really a queasy person, but that made me feel sick. So that was explained. But we got to do some observations first, your weight, your height, your temperature. Started doing all the checks. I was nearly 40 degrees. You can't have a temperature on chemotherapy because you've got an infection. Chemotherapy wipes out everything. Any infection's very dangerous. So basically I was turned away. I was sent home with some steroids to try and calm things, to hopefully come back in a week's time. 1 week later, the steroids finished on the Sunday. I said to Holly, I guarantee things will spike again. By the Monday, the temperatures are spiking. I went into Princess of Wales on the Tuesday. My temperature spiked as I sat down at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I was sick in a bowl, and they kept me on a drip all day, feeding me fluids, and let me go home at 6 o'clock that night. And by 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock that evening, I was spiking temperatures and told to go back in, and I never left hospital again. They kept me in, monitoring me, had me on the strongest antibiotics they could to try and get the infection under control, but because it had grown into the bladder, it would have days where it would do nothing and then it would spike temps, and obviously they needed it to be the temperatures to go to be able to get me into the chemotherapy, but that never happened. So I spent weeks in Princess of Wales, and then they moved me to Morriston, where they put me on a ward and eventually came and explained that they weren't going to win the battle and they were going to have to operate. So at this point, Kelly Jones, who was one of the nurses who worked under my consultant, came and sat down with me and basically explained the procedure that was going to take place in the coming days. It was an in-depth surgery. It was going to be very intense, and 8 to 10 hours in theatre with intensive care afterwards. Again, all things that were a shock to my system. My first surgery, which I'd had prior to this one, was the only surgery I've ever had in my life, and the pain I felt after that they cut me open keyhole was surreal. So to be told that they're now going to cut me straight down the middle, open me up, remove the tumour, take out my bladder, replumb things, was something that I struggled with for quite a while, laying in a hospital bed with Holly sitting next to me. She went through everything and explained that basically I said to her, I said, well, if we do nothing and leave me, how long will I have? She said, the rate the tumour's growing, you probably have about a year, but you probably won't see that. So there was never a question, because obviously I was only asking it because I didn't want to have 2 bags and live the rest of my life like that. But it was a case of, you either have these or you're not going to be here to see your kids grow up or do anything past 2023. So that was the plan. So February came and I woke up ready to go, and they wheeled me down, and the operation was a huge success. They removed the tumour, my bladder, which by then the tumour was the size of a grapefruit. If you ever go to Tesco's and pick a grapefruit up, that's a fair sized tumour. It was stage 4 by that time, and there is no stage 5. I'm lucky to be able to tell this story and really explain what happens when you go through these type of things. It was an intense surgery that left me in intensive care with things sewn into me. I had pain relief down the scar, I had cannulas in my arms, things in my neck, tubes down my nose. It was mind-boggling what they can do, and also a bit of a shock to your system when then the next day they want you to get out of bed and take some steps, because you're just attached to everything. But I'm pig stubborn and refused to quit. So the nurse came to see me and said, look, you've had a surgery, we need to get up a couple of steps up the ward. I said, you hold my gown, because I had just a gown on and I don't want to flash my bum with the rest of the people here. And I walked up and down the ward 12 times, to which they were amazed by, things I'd had major bowel surgery the day before. But that was always my attitude through the whole thing. They always told me I was really positive, and driven through the whole of my cancer treatments. But that's the way I went into it, because I didn't believe that it was fair, and I certainly didn't agree with the fact that I was going through something that nobody should have to go through, and I wasn't going to quit. I've got a partner and kids to be there for, so it was get on with it or sulk, and I'm not that type of person. So recovered from that surgery, everything went well. My consultant came to see me, was really impressed with how I did in the hospital, and I was allowed to go home. Eating after it was horrific. You can't imagine how swollen everything is inside you, even though the outside's starting to look okay with just a scar down the middle, you're bruised. But when they've taken everything out from inside and put it all back again, it is swollen. Even eating basic foods, I struggled. I was living on ice lollies and quavers for about 2 weeks. I lost about 3 stone. And it was probably the illest I'd looked through the earlier part of my treatment. And it was all right, apart from losing weight and not being able to eat a lot. I felt good. Pain-wise, I was okay. And then I got an infection where the bladder was. Weirdly, after taking out your bladder, you're no longer able to wee, because now all my urine goes into a bag, which I have by here, which I've got for the rest of my life. But the brain still thinks that you work as normal, because that's how you're programmed. So I stood over a toilet multiple times, you need to wee, and I was like, I can't wee. And I spoke to my nurse, and she was like, it's a brain thing, you need to just, like, it'll go. But it's almost cruel, because obviously, having had it defunctioned, it was a bit of a upsetting moment, standing there looking at something that will never work as it was meant to have done for the last 30 odd years. Anyway, so I stood over the toilet, and all of a sudden I started weeing this red and black stuff, and it wasn't a little bit, it was a lot, and it's like cutting your garden hose off and you're still watering your plants. I couldn't quite work out what was going on, because nothing should come out of there. So called the doctors, you need to come in. Ended up having an infection, collection of fluid where the bladder was, which then had to be drained with a catheter, which was probably one of the most painful things I've ever had done to me, because it was a collection of not just plain fluid, it was bits of mucousy stuff which is lumpy. They had to put the maximum size tube inside me, which was the most painful thing I've ever felt in my life. I don't think I've ever begged for mercy, but that put tears in my eyes, and left me in a room for 2 days where I basically didn't move. Holly would come and visit me, and I just lay there on a bed and couldn't get off the bed. That went away, and touch wood, there was no problems after that. And then it led into my chemotherapy, which again was something else. I didn't really know anyone had been through. I had no idea how it was going to go. We turned up, they put a little line in your hand, 2-hour drip, and then tablets for 2 weeks. Side effects of chemotherapy. I couldn't go out in the cold. This was April, so although it was warmer, I couldn't drink anything cold, eat anything cold, touch anything cold. Just it put you into shock. If you drank something cold, your throat muscles would spasm and close up, so you're almost choking. So you literally had to have warm stuff everywhere. I always think of people now when I see them in Tesco's and Sainsbury's in the fridge sections in the warmer days, and they're wrapped up, and I always wonder if they were going through what I'd been through, purely for the fact that you always judge people on site and you don't know their stories. So it's always made me a little bit more aware now, because I was that guy with a mask on, I had a scarf on, because it hurt. Your face would sting, your hands would sting. I had gloves and a scarf on, walking around Sainsbury's in April and May, looking like a wally, but I had no choice, because otherwise my whole body was stinging head to toe. The first session of chemotherapy was fine. The sickness was okay. I had these horrific hiccups for a day where I didn't stop hiccuping, which is a side effect of the anti-sickness drugs, so they had to balance that. And I felt good. I thought, if it's going to be like this, then I'll get through this. The second one absolutely ruined me. Ruined me. I've never felt so exhausted and unwell in all my life. The nausea was horrific, and then I spiked the temperature. I rung Valindra, who were amazing. You need to come straight in, and I was spiking over 41 degrees, and they said then, we've literally got a small window where we need to treat you, otherwise you can end up being borderline sepsis. Unfortunately, people can pass away after having cancer surgeries and can pass away in the chemo section, which sounds horrific, because if you survive the cancer bit, you don't want to then die in something else. Like it was another mind-boggling moment. So yeah, I spent a week in there, and I went home the day before Father's Day to spend it with the kids, which was a nice moment. And then the third one was okay, and then I had another session, and then I had another infection then, and I ended up Princess of Wales. So chemotherapy was brutal, but it was another part of the journey that I'd had to go through, and there was something else that had to be done. The whole point of the chemo was to try and shrink the tumour that was sitting in the liver that they hadn't been able to touch from when they first saw it in the November. It had just been growing on its own, but because it was secondary, they weren't so worried because it was only of a small size. So that was left while they tried to do all the other treatments. So that was that. So in the November, the liver, I had to recover from chemotherapy, and then I was booked in for my liver operation. They struggled in the operation because, again, because I'd had so much extensive surgery, there's a huge amount of scar tissue bonded to my liver. So they had a bit of a bleed in the surgery, which left them 45 minutes battling to keep me here, as my consultant told me afterwards, which they did, obviously, thankfully. But they removed about 38% of my liver, including the tumour, which at that point then left me technically cancer-free. They'd taken out the big one and they'd taken out the small one. And I recovered from that pretty well. So my cancer story in my head ended there, and then it was back to living normal life. But unfortunately, when your body goes through extensive amount of work, nothing's that straightforward. Your body takes a long time to recover from things that shouldn't be done to it. You also learn how to live with things that you weren't born with. And mentally, it's a challenge as well. It's not just the physical aspect of it, it's the mental things you've been through, the sacrifices, the pain, the suffering, and your family as well. Holly went through a lot. As did my mum and dad and the kids, which I wouldn't wish to put on them ever again, and no one would. As a dad, a brother, a son, you can't imagine what that's like, to the worry that they all went through watching me suffer. Holly the worst, because she was with me, obviously. She saw things that luckily most of my family didn't, which will haunt her probably for the rest of her life. Anyway, so we got through that, and planned trips, planned holidays, and got on with life as normal, and started to rebuild, learn to live with the changes and the sacrifices and everything we've been through and put it behind us. I'm kind of the type of person that the past is the past and we move forward, because if you're living your past, you're never going to move forward. You have to build for a future. If you focus on things that could have happened, didn't happen, you're never going to go anywhere. So yeah, we aim for a good future. Willow was growing, she'd grown through all my treatments, which was hard on times, but coming home out of hospital and seeing her little face was so worthwhile. Obviously the older kids were able to sit and chat and just understand that Dad was getting better, but she won't have a memory of what I went through. She'll only know through pictures and what we tell her when she's older, maybe. But the main thing is that she was able to just smile and laugh and live her best life when Dad was going through a rougher time. So we got through that and things were going well, and then it got to about the April 24, and I had this horrific pain in my stomach. Couldn't explain it, but it felt like I had really bad trapped wind, but it was crippling. So I was drinking water thinking, oh, I'll just flush it through. But it was getting worse, I was laying on the bed, and I was always A&E was the last possible thing. And Holly came up, I'd been on the bed all afternoon, Holly came up about 6 o'clock and said, I think you should go to A&E. And I literally took the words out of my mouth, and we got up and she took me in. And as I walked in through the door and gave my name, obviously my name on the system kind of almost like green lights me straight through, because obviously what I'd been through. So the lady said, take a seat. And as the nurse called my name, I was being sick in bowels. And she's like, oh, love, what's happened? And I was like, I don't know, I'm in this pain. And they said, it looks like your bowel's twisted. So with the surgeries, the extensive surgeries, the intestines get these little nodules on them. So when you haven't been handled, yours will sit inside you and move gently without any kind of issue. But because mine had these little nodules on, when one would touch, they would grip and then they twist. So it's a bit like a garden hose kinking, except your tap's still on, but there's nothing coming out the other end, and the pressure's building, but this is inside me, to the point where I'm in excruciating agony and they're giving me morphine for the pain. So I sat in the hospital corridor, typical A&E, unfortunately didn't have any beds, sat me in a corridor. I sat there for about 17 hours, again, being sick in bowels, unable to do anything other than that. And then a doctor came to see me about 2:30 in the morning and said, we had a tray of stuff So he calls me into a room and he said, look, we've got to put this tube up your nose into your stomach. And again, when you come out of surgery and you've been asleep and they've done things to you, it's not so bad. When they do things to you when you're awake, it's a whole another level. And someone sticking something up your nose, which is going to make you gag, and telling you to keep swallowing, was horrendous. And he feeds it into my stomach, and then I just sat there holding this bag, which basically stopped everything going through the bowel, and anything would come up into the stomach. So I spent 4 days in hospital with this tube up my nose, where they basically let the bowel settle and they untwisted, and then I was free to go home. Things were going back in the stoma bag, felt great. 1 week later, exactly the same again, crippling pain. They sent me back in, admitted me. I spent about 3 days, I think it was a Wednesday. There was a Thursday and Holly was sitting next to me and I was in excruciating pain because they told me to eat a meal because the bag wasn't doing anything. They needed me to eat a solid meal before they discharged me. So I ate the meal, felt great because it was the first time I eaten a real meal in a week or so. But the bowel twisted again, unfortunately. But then my surgeon came up and said, we're taking you for emergency surgery, which was a shock because everything was always planned with all the other surgeries, so we could prepare for them mentally and just be like, okay. So that put a tear in my eye because I was like, well, this is a bit scary. If you emptying theatre to take me now, and he literally took me within 10 minutes, took me down there, cut me back open, and the small intestine had knotted itself around my large intestine. And he told me that if he hadn't operated on that Thursday, then I wouldn't have seen the Friday because the bowel would have perforated and split, and I would have been in a whole world of mess. And scary, but there was nothing I could have done about that. I was laying in a hospital bed, there was nothing I did, and it was all because I've had previous surgeries that kept me here, but then left me with other issues, because that's what happens when they do things inside the human body that, although they fix one problem, it can create another. So that was resolved. And I went home, and then after that I was okay. Everything was good, life was good, we had a holiday. And then September, I ended up with a UTI. Now, because I haven't got a bladder, I can't feel anything when I pass urine. So for anyone else, if you get a UTI, it burns, it stings, you go to the doctors, you get antibiotics within the first couple of days, you wouldn't let it pass. Because I can't feel anything, the UTI travelled all the way back up the stoma to my kidneys and made my kidneys swell, which left me in hospital with swollen kidneys, and my kidneys were really struggling for a week, where they put my antibiotics, again admitted into a hospital bed, and all again because I've had something done that kept me here. But because it's man-made, sort of, and it's not meant to be there, the body has a different way of dealing with things, and it's not something I can prevent, because although I can do tests to test my urine now, which I do regularly, there's nothing really that can stop me getting an infection there. It doesn't matter how clean I am, it only takes a little bit of something and it'll travel its way up there. But again, it's something I got to live with for the rest of my life, so it's just something I have to be mindful of. And since then, touch wood, everything's been good. I've gone back into the gym, doing what I enjoy, and life's on the up. Proposed to my partner and planning a wedding. So I think the whole part of the story is that you should never give up. However hard things get, there is always, however distant, a light at the end of the tunnel. But I think the point of my story is it doesn't matter what people see from this, that any cancer battle isn't as simple as just a little surgery and that person's okay afterwards. There's a lot more goes into it. There's probably things I've forgotten to talk about because it is extensive. The amount of blood tests, cannulas, failed cannulas, different things they've pulled out of me, stuck in me, it's barbaric. It's something that nobody should ever go through, and something that U-Test, that I've got involved with because Harry, one of my friends, put up on his social media about it, and I jumped on it. I dropped him a message, and this is where we are today, because I've got friends that have been ill, been diagnosed, some have sadly passed away, and we're in our 40s. There's no excuse. There's people down in Swansea at the moment. There's a young girl down there, she's 28 with bowel cancer. This isn't something that's happening to people in their 60s, 70s, 80s anymore. There's people in their 20s, and if someone told you when you're 20 years old you'd have bowel cancer before you were 30, you would laugh at them. If someone told me when I was 20 I'd have bowel cancer at 39 and might not see 40, I would never have believed them. They put a lot of it down to diet, poor nutrition, sugary foods. Cancer does supposedly survive on sugary foods, which is fair enough. I don't know how much I agree with these facts, because I was bodybuilding, my diet was the cleanest it possibly could have been through the time when my tumour was growing. The tumour was a polyp for 10 years, and then it changed into a cancer and grew for the 2. So from 21, when that doctor sent me home, it was there, and the 22, when they first saw it, it was starting to grow at an alarming rate. But in those years, I was eating the cleanest, healthiest diet I can. And I think this is what we need to understand, that it isn't just about what we're putting in us. We can stand in front of a mirror and go to a gym and look like we're living in the best shape and the healthiest we are, but this will catch people and it will get you. Nobody is safe. Do the test, check yourself regularly, take it to the doctors and show them what you've got. If they turn you away the first time, go back again. I'm in Oak Tree Surgery, there's more doctors up there than, I don't think I've ever seen the same doctor. So that first doctor that palmed me off, I've never seen him again, but I saw a lady the second time and she saved my life. For something you can buy and do at home in your own comfort, and just check yourself. Yeah, hopefully 90% of you check yourself will be negative, but that one person that comes back positive, take it to the doctors, follow it up, and please keep pushing until you get the results you need, because it was missed. It was missed in 2021 and it was there then, and I've had to go through the most extensive surgeries to still be here to tell my story, when if it was found in 2021, I would have had a small surgery. Yes, I would have had cancer, and yes, it would always have that in my life, but my surgery would have been minute. I would have had a little surgery, probably keyhole, maybe a bag as a temporary, and the recovery would have been quicker, and I would have had nowhere near the complications I've had now. I would still have, my liver would have been intact, and I probably still have my bladder, which all my other bodily functions would have been working normally. Or you ignore the symptoms and you end up in my situation, or unfortunately worse. I was doing regular blood tests through the bodybuilding with a company that checks for everything in your body apart from cancer, because they're checking for, it's bodybuilding, so they're checking to make sure your organs are running properly, your hormone levels have got balance, and every single thing is working as it should, while bodybuilding basically, the only thing it's not checking for is your bowel, which is why I believe people need to get this into their regime of, right, I take all my supplements, this is for this, this is for this, and once a month I take a U-Test, I check my bowel, I check my stool, and I tick the boxes as you do with all your other supplements, because you don't run out of your protein, you don't run out of your creatine, because they're ticked off every month and there's something that you add in daily, whereas this test probably isn't in 90% of these people's cupboards, whereas it can be for a simple trip down to Home Bargains, and for a price less than a cup of coffee. It's not worth avoiding. Get your missus to go down there, I'm sure she goes regularly, and chuck a couple in your basket. It's a simple test, easy enough to do, with the instructions are clearly labelled on the back. It's probably a 5-minute test that, there you are, results in 5 minutes. So within 5 minutes, it will give you an answer whether there's a small bit of blood in the stool, or a negative test and there's no blood at all. If there is blood in your stool, you can make an appointment with your doctors, explain that you've used this test and that you're concerned, and the doctor should follow protocol and follow that up. Now, they may turn you away. They may fob you off. They may say there's nothing wrong. The first doctor that saw me in 21 turned me away. He did exactly the same thing. I was passing blood, I had pain in the bowel, and he sent me home. Now, as I said earlier in the video, I don't live in the past. I don't blame him as such, but if I had done this test and gone to see him and he turned me away, I would have been probably more likely to go back and see another doctor for a second opinion of what was going on, and maybe they would have been different. And then, instead of my cancer turning into as aggressive in the size it was, I would have been seen earlier. I probably would, I believe, still have my bladder, which means I'd have all my bodily functions. I wouldn't have a bag. I would have had my liver intact, and all for the sake of, like I said, less than a cup of coffee. It could have saved me going through the hardship and the heartache and the upset that has caused my family, friends, and the endless mental scarring that I've now got to live with, for the sake of just popping to your local store and grabbing one of these. I think this is something that can turn a corner and do some great things. So if you do something today, just pop and grab one of these guys. It's really not worth going through what I've been through for the sake of, like I said, a cheap McDonald's or a cup of coffee. Home Bargains. They're also available online, and they're easy enough to find, and they're clearly labelled. So if you can't find them in the store, just ask someone and they'll direct you to them, I'm sure.